2 for Friday night. At 8, Scylla and Bob are back.
Hello, Mike. Surprise, surprise.
Hello.
Surprise, surprise!
And another surprise at 9.
You are a naughty boy, Race boy.
Nigel Havers is the charmer, and the girls just can't resist those devilish good looks. Surprise, surprise at 8, and the charmer at 9. 2 for Friday night on Anglia.
This is Anglia with the news on the hour.
Hello, I'm Nicholas Owen. Welcome to News at 1. The headlines this Friday lunchtime. Liberal Democrats claim a nuclear plant was in danger of meltdown. Boat people still reaching Hong Kong, the rough reception they get there. West Germany helps one young and maimed Afghan war victim. And we will meet again, reviving the old wartime shows.
And the weather headline. A sunny afternoon in most places, with rain crossing Wales and the west later. Over the weekend, sunshine and showers, but back to wet and windy weather on Monday. Details later.
First, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Paddy Ashdown, says he has information about a critical emergency at the Hinkley B power station last weekend. He believes there was a danger of a complete meltdown. In the last few minutes, Nuclear Electric insist there was no danger to the public. Mr. Ashdown has written to the Energy Secretary John Wakeham demanding a full-scale inquiry. He says his information is that both reactors at Hinkley in Somerset were totally without any means of cooling for about 20 minutes because power had failed during storms last Sunday. And he says staff had to cope with the emergency in the dark. Mr. Ashdown's claims come only a day after a medical report into the incidence of leukemia among children of workers at the Sellafield nuclear plant.
In his letter, Mr. Ashdown claims that power supplies to the Hinkley B station were interrupted twice late on Sunday night because storms whipped up sea spray which shorted out a substation. Those supplies are essential to power electric fans for cooling the reactor. In the Commons this morning, the Liberal Democrat energy spokesman called for an inquiry.
Apparently, on the 11th of February, the Hinkley Point power station, as a result of storms, was out of action and had no cooling for 20 minutes, which could have led to a serious meltdown and a major nuclear incident. I understand that the Secretary of State has been notified about this, but I'm sure the House will appreciate that to investigate whether or not this actually took place is a matter of considerable urgency and public concern.
It's alleged someone in the control room disabled the automatic systems that switch on the station's emergency generators when power from the grid is interrupted.
The information that I have, Mr. Deputy Speaker, suggests that a serious incident took place where power failed, the cooling system failed, the lights failed, and there was considerable disorder and anxiety.
Nuclear Electric told ITN a few minutes ago that both reactors shut down automatically in the incident and there was no danger of a meltdown.
At Sellafield, there's been a union demand for compensation for local children with leukemia following the independent medical report linking the disease with fathers who work at the nuclear plant. New health checks for staff have already been ordered.
Sellafield and the surrounding community are today coming to terms with the findings of yesterday's report. British Nuclear Fuels has written to all 7,500 people who work here, offering counselling if they want it, but there's been little response so far.
It's a little early yet. Clearly, when a report of this magnitude and this importance and of this concern goes out, people are just a little shell-shocked at first, and we have to give them time to think carefully about what the report says and about how we are reacting before we go on and talk in detail to them.
Unions representing Sellafield's workforce now want talks to discuss what can be done.
They really want to know, you know, what's happening, how true is the report. Obviously, Dr. Gardner is a well-respected scientist. We've got to treat the report as if it is all fact, and we're now seeking urgent talks with the management on what happens from here.
Next week, Professor Martin Gardner, who wrote the report, will come to Sellafield himself to meet workers face-to-face and answer their questions. Management here at Sellafield have acted swiftly following the publication of yesterday's report. Now they face the uphill task of offering what reassurance they can to the many thousands of people, especially family men, who work here. Jim Buchanan, ITN, Sellafield.
Labour has accused the Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd of betraying the people of Hong Kong over the constitutional handover of the colony to China in 1997. Mr. Hurd was in the Commons to announce the constitutional agreement being negotiated between Britain and China over the colony's political future. The Basic Law, as it's termed, allows for directly elected representatives on Hong Kong's governing body after it's handed over to the Chinese. The Shadow Foreign Secretary Gerald Kaufman said Mr. Hurd had caved in completely to China over the number of seats and said the announcement would be greeted with dismay in Hong Kong.
Demonstrations like this one have become common in Hong Kong. The way Chinese authorities massacred their own pro-democracy campaigners in Tiananmen Square has led many in Hong Kong to dread the Chinese takeover in 1997. These people want democracy now, and that's proved a knotty problem for Douglas Hurd, who has had to balance their demands with those of the Chinese authorities determined to slow down the process. Today he came to the Commons with a possible compromise to allow direct elections to a third of the Hong Kong legislature by 1997.
Now, this rate of progress would not be as rapid as many people in Hong Kong or we ourselves would have liked to see, but it would be a considerable improvement on the position reached in December, and it would reflect a willingness by the Basic Law drafters to respond to the representations which we and others in Hong Kong have been making.
His surrender to China on elections to the Legislative Council has in fact given China a decisive voice in what happens in Hong Kong, not in 7 years' time, but now. He has allowed the Chinese completely to dictate the pace of progress.
But Mr. Hurd got unexpected support from the SDP leader.
He has taken a realpolitik decision of some courage, and he should not be too concerned by this talk of cringing and craving from people who are not facing the realities.
All eyes will now turn to Hong Kong, where politicians have been demanding direct elections to 50% of the legislature. The colony's stability may depend on their reaction to today's compromise. Kim Catcherside, ITN, Westminster.
Lord Ennals, the Labour peer who was one of 2 official British observers sent to Hong Kong and Vietnam to investigate the problem of the boat people who've left Vietnam in large numbers, said this morning that conditions in the colony's refugee camps were like the black hole of Calcutta. He was speaking after watching a special report for News at 1 highlighting what happened to one Vietnamese family typical of the refugees still leaving despite efforts to prevent any further departures. Today, in one of the biggest detention centres in Hong Kong, a 28-year-old man was found hanging. He's now in a critical condition in hospital. As ITN's Norman Rees reports, some Vietnamese have no idea they can be sent back against their will.
The Vietnamese make no effort to sneak into Hong Kong. This boat arrived in full view of a police launch and drew alongside at first warning. On board, 8 Vietnamese, 4 men and 4 women. Their route, the one favoured in the winter months, overland to China, then the hazardous 10-day sea voyage in this tiny craft bought at the Chinese port of Pingchao. Marine police hand them a paper explaining Hong Kong's policy towards them. Sail on or submit to instant detention. It warns they'll have no freedoms or right to seek work, that they're very unlikely to be deemed refugees and will probably be repatriated. Despite the warnings, they choose to come on board. Their only real asset, the boat that cost them £1,000, representing a lifetime savings, now in tow. It will be destroyed without compensation.
No matter what the hardships they faced over the last few weeks, perhaps the most bitter part of their journey is the next 16 miles into Hong Kong, as they begin to come to terms with the fact that they will not be made welcome there.
But even now, they clutch onto hope. 30-year-old Mark Tume produces names of relatives living abroad. She's convinced she'll soon be able to join them. If they'd known they could be forced back to Vietnam, they would never have left, they told us. And they had not heard of the squalor and deprivation of the camps. They were soon to find out. At Green Island, the colony's centre for new arrivals, their reception is singularly lacking in human warmth and dignity. Body searches, delousing and other immediate medical procedures carried out on an open pier without privacy or shelter. Green Island is now being used by the government to carry out the controversial screening procedure of boat people as soon as they land. The hope is it will deter the springtime exodus of thousands more Vietnamese. ITN's appearance with this group had taken the authorities here by surprise. The camp has been closed to journalists. But we saw enough in our last few moments with these new arrivals to catch a glimpse of what their life will be like in the next few weeks. In trying to ensure the Vietnamese realize they have no future if they come here, it's unclear whether Green Island is a place the government wants the world to remember or to forget. Norman Rees, ITN, Hong Kong.
We asked the Foreign Office to comment on Norman Rees's report. A spokesman said the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Hurd, knows what it's like, having recently visited the colony. After Lord Ennals, who was one of the British observers who saw things for himself in Vietnam and Hong Kong, had seen our report, I asked him what he thought of the reception that had greeted that boatload of refugees.
To catch new arrivals.
I think it's disgraceful that they should have to face that sort of horror, really. I mean, it was like the black hole of Calcutta, wasn't it? I mean, gross overcrowding. People are in 3 tiers with no sort of privacy at all. I think this is no way in which human beings should ever be treated.
Do you not think it possible that those facilities can be improved?
They must be improved. But it requires some commitment by the British government. It requires money, resources by the British government, both for helping Vietnam and also helping the Hong Kong authorities. But there is a feeling in Hong Kong, make the conditions squalid enough, and that will be enough of a deterrent. I don't think it's a fair policy.
Does it mean, do you think, that the Vietnamese authorities are not keeping up their end of the bargain and explaining to the population of Vietnam what might await them if they try and head away?
Well, they have done something, but they have not had much support in doing it. One of the things we strongly recommended was that there should be really a video campaign, that films should be made available in villages, in cities, in wherever. People haven't got much other alternative entertainment, and this is very popular. And really, we need to put some money to help the Vietnamese with video equipment to show the films from Hong Kong so that they know what's facing them.
Do you doubt the good faith of the Vietnamese authorities?
I don't actually know. I mean, I've been now twice to Vietnam, and what I've seen and what I've heard from others, I do not now doubt the intent of the Vietnamese to treat these people fairly and to try to discourage them from going. But it's a very poor country. It has been starved of any sort of international aid, and to expect them to put up a performance when we don't help them, I think is really too much.
Lord Ennals. The annual rate of inflation announced this morning is unchanged. It remains at 7.7% on an annual basis for the 3rd month running. Some city analysts had expected a small drop and now say it could soon go back above 8% because of rising mortgage rates and the poll tax.
The Chancellor's warned there'll be no early relief from his high interest rate medicine. Today's inflation figures will stiffen his resolve to stick with 15% rates, whatever the problems for home buyers and companies. Inflation has remained stubbornly high over the last year, even though high interest rates are supposed to bring it down. It's been stuck at 7.7% for the last 3 months. The Abbey National's decision to raise mortgage rates will probably be followed by other lenders. That'll feed through to the retail prices index in the next few months, as will the poll tax. And these 2 factors could push inflation up again.
Well, I think it means that the headline inflation rate is going to go back up to hit 8% in April. I think it means that the rate excluding mortgages, which is the Chancellor's favourite measure, will continue to drift up.
I think the news is bad. It's bad in that what was supposed to be a blip has turned out to be a fairly long-lasting phenomenon, and I think the future doesn't look very encouraging. So we're stuck with high inflation at the same time as we've got almost nil economic growth, and we have the danger of a recession.
So the outlook isn't good for home buyers or anyone connected with the housing market. If inflation is going to stay high for the rest of the year, the Chancellor won't want to risk any reduction in interest rates.
The French contractors working on the Channel Tunnel are suing the builder's Eurotunnel in a Paris court for more than £60 million in overdue payments. Earlier this week, Eurotunnel said it was unable to draw on bank loans because of a dispute with the contractor's TML over proposed management changes. The Guinness fraud trial got underway a second time this morning, but it was still hit by difficulties in finding a jury. The former Guinness chief executive Ernest Saunders and the other defendants were on time, but the hearing had to be adjourned for a while because some potential jurors were late. The judge said he'd be sympathetic to requests not to serve on the jury, but warned large employers they must put up with any inconvenience caused. In Belgium, at least 40 students have been injured in a bomb explosion at a university lecture theatre in Brussels. The blast and fire wrecked the auditorium at Louvain University, with the force of the explosion bringing down the ceiling. 100 students were in the theatre at the time. Fire and smoke swept through the hall almost immediately, but firemen with breathing equipment were quickly on the scene. Most of the injured were taken to a nearby hospital, where officials said at least 13 were seriously hurt. In the third of ITN's special reports to mark the first anniversary of the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, we look at the way charities in the West are helping some of the children injured in the civil war to rebuild their lives. Paul Davis, who was last there to cover the withdrawal of Soviet troops, now reports.
Benafsha's injuries are tragically common in Afghanistan. The 10-year-old lost both legs when she stepped on a mine. But her story is one of courage in tragedy. Courage she demonstrated to her Afghan doctors when these pictures were taken 4 months ago, soon after the explosion. She told them she was glad no other members of her family had been hurt by the mine. Today, in another hospital, thousands of miles from her Kabul home, Benafsha continues to show that courage and determination to salvage her shattered life. The staff at this clinic near Dusseldorf in West Germany have donated their skills to help children like Benafsha mutilated by the Afghan civil war. Today, their staff patient has visitors. 2 friends from Kabul, Halima and Nazarene. Both were brought to Germany suffering from war injuries. Their treatment's been so successful, they'll soon be able to return home. As old hands who've seen it all before, they're keen to tell Benafsha about the next stage of her rehabilitation. When her wounds are mended, she'll be taken to join a remarkable community called the Friedensdorf, or Peace Village. Situated near the city of Oberhausen, the Peace Village cares for young victims of war from around the world. Here, Afghan, Vietnamese and Cambodian mix easily. They have a lot in common. The village arranges for critically injured youngsters to be collected from countries where medical resources can no longer cope. It finds places for them in German hospitals, and when they're strong enough, helps them overcome their handicaps. 9-year-old Bamidullah from Afghanistan is learning how to use his artificial legs. Like Benafsha, he lost his own legs when he trod on a landmine. Today he's attempting to stand up for the first time since the explosion. At this stage, each faltering step is awkward and painful. But mastering the artificial limbs will give the boy independence. All the facilities are provided by donations from the public. 150 Afghan children have been cared for here. But back in Kabul, there's an ever-growing queue of youngsters like Benafsha and Bamidullah who need similar help. Today, after the latest rocket attack, there are 6 new patients in the ward where Benafsha was treated. They are the fortunate ones. 2 other children have died from their injuries. Sadly, there's not enough room or money for all these youngsters to follow Benafsha to Germany. Paul Davis, ITN, Afghanistan.
British Satellite Broadcasting is to launch its 5-channel television service at the end of next month. That's even before their satellite dishes are available in the shops. Initially, its programmes will be shown on cable to about 300,000 homes. Its main competitor in the satellite market, Sky, has had 4 channels on air for a year now, but has suffered big losses.
At their studios in central London, staff at BSB are now actively preparing for launch. Transmissions will begin on March the 25th, and those linked to the cable network will be able to tune in from that date. The national launch with satellite dishes will be a month later. Squarials will be available as the service goes on air. They'll cost about £350 with installation, rather more than the bigger Sky dishes, which are about £100 cheaper. The rivals in the satellite battle have invested millions. BSB is owned by 4 main shareholders, the British companies Granada, Reed International and Pearson, and Chancellor of France. It's headed by Anthony Simmons Gooding. Sky is owned by News Corporation, the international publishing empire of Rupert Murdoch. BSB has ploughed about 500 million into technology and programmes before coming on air. It expects to lose 200 million in its first year, but to break even by 1993. Sky had lower start-up costs, about 100 million, because it doesn't own its satellite. It lost about 150 million in its first year, but it also hopes to break even in 1993.
I don't think there's room for both, so which means that one is doomed to failure unless in some way they can combine forces, which at the moment it's hard to see how they could possibly do that.
I think there is demand out there, and combined with some clever marketing, which I'm sure we're going to see from BSB, people will be convinced to buy the satellite dishes or rent them.
There is clear evidence that viewers want more films on TV and will pay to see new releases quickly. This is the market that both companies need to capture to succeed.
One of Britain's most effective weapons, they say, during World War II is to be revived. ENSA, the wartime entertainment which kept up the troops' morale, is being recreated as a stage show in London. Popularly known as Every Night Something Awful, the show starred artists like Vera Lynn, Gracie Fields and George Formby. During its lifetime, ENSA gave an astonishing 2.5 million performances around the world.
Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye.
This morning at the Imperial War Museum, the cast of a musical about the wartime entertainers recaptured the spirit of the times. Back then, such entertainers were crucial to the war effort. None more so, of course, than Dame Vera Lynn, who remembered today in particular one arduous tour of Burma in 1944.
The heat, the monsoon, the rains, and the insects, the flies. But I think what sticks in my mind most of all is the appreciation of the boys.
ENSA laid on highbrow entertainment and more down-market shows. But a cartoon strip, Jane, did more than most for morale when she was shown naked, as the woman who posed for the strip remembers well.
The next morning, I was in the paper in the Altogether, and it's alleged that the 8th Army advanced 18 miles after that.
Some wartime entertainers are still going strong, though new generations don't remember them so well. This boy asked Spike Milligan if he was famous.
Sort of famous, yes. Old ladies remember me.
He said he'd ask his grandmother if she remembered him.
All children are to be killed who don't know me. I'm famous, I tell you.
Many still do remember what the wartime entertainers did and are making sure others don't forget. Stuart Maister, ITN at the Imperial War Museum.
I'll have the main news summary in a moment. First, though, here's Trish Williamson with the weather.
Thanks, Nick. Well, we've exchanged high winds for lower temperatures, but there's plenty of sunshine too. A ridge of high pressure is responsible for the settled conditions, struggling to keep weather from the Atlantic at bay. On the satellite sequence from midnight last night, you can see the overnight weather clearing away into Europe, leaving clear skies and a few showers, with those fronts to the west of Britain poised to come in over the weekend. Now, Europe has borne the brunt of the worst weather this week. Heavy snowfall means frustrated skiers are flocking to the slopes, but the blizzards also triggered avalanches in Saas-Fee and Val d'Isère, blocking roads and isolating hundreds of British skiers in their resorts. Now, back in the UK, our weather is certainly the best we've had for some time. Most of the country starts the afternoon in a blaze of winter sunshine. The exceptions are the far north of Scotland, where there'll be wintry showers, and the southwest of the country, where there's thicker cloud and rain. Now, it is sunny, but cold, 5 in the north, 7 in the south. And this evening, wetter weather from the west country will cross Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. Temperatures fall quickly under clear skies, and there'll be frost in most places by midnight. Overnight, cloud and rain will move across the entire country, turning to snow on high ground. By morning, it will be milder but windier again. So, here's the weekend summary. There'll be rain at times in the north and west tomorrow, elsewhere dry, mild and cloudy. On Sunday, it'll be brighter and drier, with occasional showers in the west. But by Sunday evening, wet and very windy weather will have reached Ireland, ready to cross Great Britain on Monday. And finally, stormy weather is still sweeping over North America. A deep depression has drawn warm air up from the Gulf. As this met cold air in the north, snow turned to freezing rain, causing a rapid build-up of ice on cold surfaces. Forecasters say 6 millimetres of ice an hour was forming in Midwestern cities like Detroit, making driving conditions treacherous and causing delays at major airports. Much better on our side of the Atlantic. Nick.
Indeed. The main news again. MPs have been told there was a danger of a safety problem at Hinkley Nuclear Power Station in Somerset last weekend after nuclear reactors were left without vital cooling because of the storms. Nuclear Electric says there was no danger, but the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Paddy Ashdown, has called for a full-scale inquiry. While we've been on air, the government's official body, the Nuclear Installation Inspectorate, says the cooling to the reactor was never interrupted. They say there was no safety risk. And Labour's accused the Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, of caving in to China over the future of Hong Kong. That's News at 1 this Friday lunchtime from all of us here. Have a good weekend.
Good afternoon. 43 people, including 7 firemen, have been taken to hospital for checkups after a chemical spillage at a Northampton transport depot. Firemen were called to the TNT premises on the town's Spinney industrial estate, where a liquid corrosive chemical was found to be leaking in a container. The chemical is similar in effect to ammonia. The area was evacuated while the spillage was cleaned up, but the firemen and people nearby are in hospital to check if they have inhaled toxic fumes. The National Audit Office is to investigate 11 former council-run services in Milton Keynes. It follows concern that some privatised services were handed over to former Newtown officials without undergoing a tendering process. Chris Pym, a Liberal Democrat on the town's council, has welcomed the inquiry to check that stringent conditions were met. The Deputy Manager of Milton Keynes Development Corporation said today many of the services were offered to tender but would not comment further until the investigation was complete. An 82-year-old man is being questioned by detectives in Clacton in Essex after the body of his 72-year-old wife was found in their home at Holland-on-Sea. The body was discovered by police called to the house early this morning. Councillors in Cambridge last night set the city's community charge at £428 per person. Anti-poll tax demonstrators protested outside the meeting, calling for an end to prosecutions of people who couldn't pay. The Conservatives forced a reduction of £10 on the original figure proposed by the Labour-controlled council. The Labour Party say the amount is needed to maintain services. Conservatives want council spending cut by £3 million to reduce the charge. And 2 South Lincolnshire MPs have criticised South Holland District Council in Spalding for what they call uncontrolled public spending, leading to a community charge of £316 per person. Sir Richard Boddy, the member for Holland with Boston, and Mr Quentin Davis, the member for Stamford and Spalding, are concerned by plans to build council offices costing £3 million. North West Norfolk MP Henry Bellingham has succeeded in getting an amendment to the government's Green Bill. The legislation to go before Parliament will now put a legal obligation on waste disposal firms to act responsibly. Mr Bellingham's amendment at the committee stage now means the bill replaces the light regulations with a law to ensure dumping is carried out safely. Air UK is to discontinue its daily service between Norwich and Heathrow because it's uneconomic. The commercial director said it was a bitter disappointment to the company, but the operating cost had leapt 40% over 3 years without adequate returns. The airport management say it's unlikely another operator will be found. A development described as one of Britain's finest golf and country clubs is to be built at Fritton near Great Yarmouth at a cost of £10 million. A Norfolk firm is to turn the 11-acre site at Caldecott Hall Estate into a complex, including an hotel, conference centre and indoor leisure facilities. That's it. Good afternoon.